the second guy in there as a down and out drunk, and he realized when he was trying to help Dr. Bob, that urge to want to drink was removed. Yeah, and so they started to find out they had fallen upon a formula that worked, which was one alcoholic helping another alcoholic. And they came to a simple conclusion in a lot of ways, but then when it was presented in the big book, they actually presented the idea that the problem resides in the mind, yeah? Which was a very unique thing, and that you were not going to get a solution to this problem in the mind. And so they came up with this idea. They didn't come up with it. It was downloaded, I feel. And they called it a spiritual solution. And then the 12 steps of recovery is that the target of those 12 steps is to produce a spiritual awakening in us that has a sufficient enough strength that it will bring us sanity where the insanity that used to precede the first drink is, yeah? So we'll become sane, and this whole thing about studying everything is completely academic if you didn't drink. Yeah, if you didn't drink, you wouldn't have to know almost any of this shit. But because we have, it's important to find out what the hell's going on. And they made it very clear that the drinking and the using and the eating and the acting out and the consuming and the shopping too much isn't about the shopping or the eating. There's an underlying causes and conditions that's causing us to want to seek relief. And what we're trying to seek relief from is almost an imaginary anxiety. We're listening to the head, and we may be in a very nice situation, but we don't think so. And the head is just eating us a new one day in and day out. So there is a solution. And so what happened with me, you know, I grew up in Long Island. That should explain a lot, really. There shouldn't be much there. Grew up in Long Island, typical family. My family was from Hell's Kitchen. They moved out when they did better. My father, we moved to Long Island like a lot of people wanted to. And I grew up in a little town called Rockville Center. And I was the youngest of four, and everything was going away. Nothing was that bad at all until around 5 or 6. It was very strange because I have like felt memories of when I was a kid running around. I was just running into rooms, going here, going there, and then one day I ran into a room and it was accompanied by thought. I was thought about. You know, I ran into the room, why, blah, 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 and then it never stopped from there, yeah? There was freedom from it when I was a kid, and then the thoughts showed up, and then everything was accompanied by thought, yeah? Either I was being reviewed, critiqued, you were being reviewed or critiqued, and it became fucking incessant, and it caused an irritability, restlessness, and discontent, and I couldn't get into you, and I didn't know how to compare anything, but it felt a little weird. So there I was. I learned so much in recovery, seriously, because I remember when the idea of the obsession with self which is so pronounced in recognizing the problem. I remember I went to first grade, and I went into the room, and instead of everyone, it felt like this, but everyone was sitting pointing at, yeah, but it felt like this, and I felt in my head that everyone was thinking about me. And when I thought people were thinking about me, it was on the negative side, yes. And then I decided I asked to go to the bathroom, and when I went out to go to the bathroom, I stopped at the door and I listened because I thought they were all going to start talking about me. This is the underlying cause of the irritability, restlessness, and discontent. I'm completely consumed with this idea of Paul, yeah? And if you want to know a simple working definition of self-centeredness is you see everything as how it pertains to you. And so here we are, we're almost like looking at a telescope, but we're looking back. So it says it has the power to look at the stars, but that power goes right to us. And so we just get obsessed with this shit, and it leads to me an extreme discomfort that demanded something. So I remember I was 11 years old, I was walking through the hall, and a pretty girl said hello to me, and I went home and wondered what she meant by it for 5 hours. Just sat there going over it. What the hell? It was just insane. So one night, my father died when I was young, and that's a whole other story. We got poorer and poorer. I didn't notice it, but we lost the house, then the apartment, then a two-family house. But at this point, I was about 11 or 12. My father was gone, and I was playing a night game in Little League, and my mother couldn't be there, so I was going to walk home by myself. So after the game, I was sitting in the dugout, and some older guys came in with beer, and they gave me my first drink, and my athletic career came to a screeching halt because I found what I was looking for. When I drank, I didn't care what that girl meant by saying hello to me. Yeah, I got some fucking relief. So I'm at 12 years old. There's a lot of obstacles for me to get what I want, but I meet kids just like me, and we start finding it. And what we used to do is ride our bikes around the rich section of town. It was summer. We looked, the people's garage doors would be open, and if there was a refrigerator in there or a cardboard box that looked like a case, we made a mark. Later on, we'd go there, and no one was locking their garage doors, and we'd take the shit, ride the bike to the golf course, hide it in the 15th hole bushes, and on the weekends, we'd all meet and just drink. Yeah? Drink it all up and then piss around town. And there we went. But the thing is, as soon as I started to drink, it was very obvious that I had a magnetic appeal to people in uniform. As soon as I started to drink, I attracted undue attention. Yeah. Now, I wasn't going to stop the drink, so I had to get good at trying to avoid that undue attention, and I failed miserably. So I started to get arrested. First was they bring us to the police station, call my mother, slap you on the wrist, your mother pick you up, go home. It was fine, but it progresses like everything does in this disease. This disease is not stagnant. The disease progresses. Yeah. And it doesn't just progress because you're drinking and using. That gives it like miracle growth, but it's progressing. If you're not attending to it, it's attending to you. It's like a parasitical growth that you can try to stop it, but it's always going to be pregnantly available. This is what really flits people out. I know a lot of people who have 20 years of sobriety, and some of them have gone out, and when they've gone back to a meeting, they didn't realize how much grace was in their life because now they want to drink. They're sitting in that meeting and they want to fucking drink, and they've been relieved of that for years. Yeah, so this thing is it's a parasitical. It's not a parasite, but it has parasitical tendencies, and it can go dormant, just like the cicadas. You know, they can stay for 12 years and then they show back up. Yeah, so it can be dormant, and a lot of times when you're in a program, it's dormant. It goes to sleep, but if you leave the program, it wakes up. Yeah, because maybe the program milestone is keeping it asleep. Yeah, but you're not ready to be out of this area of this ceiling of milestone, because if you go out there, it's gonna go. Yeah, so I started to drink, started running into consequences. But the alcoholic of my type over the years is I'm willing to pay any consequence tomorrow not to feel uncomfortable now. Some people who are heavy drinkers, they can be convinced to stop drinking. I could not be convinced to stop drinking. And it definitely, through punishment, did not do it. The more I was punished, the more I wanted to get loaded. It just wasn't working. So, kept on going. I was 13, 14, 15, 16. Of course, my life was deteriorating. I had no supervision. My bigger brother, he would come over and correct me every once in a while, but he wasn't living there anymore. And I knew I could outweight him and just take whatever he did, and I'd have my little run of the place. So around 14, 15, the life's deteriorating. I get kicked out of school, 10th grade, St. Agnes, 10th grade. They try to put me in public school. Public school, the kids that were cool in public school would have gotten their asses kicked in Catholic school. I couldn't make that switch, seriously, societally. I just couldn't do it, so I just didn't go there. So I was out on my own. My mother worked, Liberty Mutual in Limbrook. My mother worked. Someone wasn't watching me. So I was just, they would lock me out, I'd get in the house. And what happened is, my mother would get me jobs. I couldn't keep the job. It just, you know. And then I decided I gotta have some money. I gotta do something. And know what was terrible, because I had a huge amount of pride, and one of my first jobs was at a hamburger joint, which all the kids from public school at lunch would go there. So I was serving these fuckers that I was in school with, and that really bothered me. I quit Weston's, it was called. I quit that pretty fast. I could not believe, whatever. But there was so much more fucking on the way. So I decided I'm gonna sell drugs out of my mother's house. And at this point, we have ended up in a 2-family house. We're on the bottom floor. There's a bedroom, and then I live in the living room. So my mom has the bedroom, and I live in the living room, Castro convertible. But there was a room downstairs, and there was an access to that room downstairs, not through the house, a side door, which I wouldn't have to see my mother. I could go right down there, and there was a cellar room. But my mother's room was right on top of that. But being completely self-centered, I could never put myself in anyone else's shoes, so fuck it, you know? So there I was, and I started to deal drugs. So first mescaline, sort of liked it, started doing this stuff, and then I got into acid. So I had 1,000 hits of acid there. 100 hits in 5 boxes, that's how I sold them, 100 hits in a Marlboro boxes. And then I had 500 hits in a jewelry box with stuff I liked in my first few months of business, like some mescaline, some shit like that. And I made this room, I painted it red, and I had those things, those stickums that are like moons and stars that when the lights go out, they seem to glow. And I had my fucking these were precious to me, my Don Juan picking peyote poster and my Jimi Hendrix poster. And if you're out my age, Jimi Hendrix was like a demigod. It was something else. So we had Jimi Hendrix there and Don Juan picking peyote. And then we had a little alcove, and we put a shower curtain so you could have some privacy if you got lucky horizontally with the other sex, you know. And I had my little mono speaker. It was supposed to be a stereo, but it just had one. It was mono, playing music, and people would come visit. Some people would just stay and hang out. Others would just get something and go. I had no idea that the guy upstairs was checking out the whole scene. And so one day, I'm walking home, and there's a big pothole in the street, and they had one of these giant batteries with a light blinking on and off, so I stole that. We were going to use that as a cheap strobe light. And I got home, I put it in the middle of the, you know, it's like when you have a dinner party, you make, you know, you put the furniture on and the silverware. This was going to be the fucking disco ball while we're tripping. So we have it there. My friends come over, we drop the acid. If you ever forget about the acid, but go to an album called Third Stone to the Sun. I don't know if it's Third to the Sun, that's the song, Third Stone to the Sun. And if you play it slow, it's Jimi Hendrix talking to you as an alien. At least he did to me. So try it, play it slower, he talks to you as if you were an alien. It's very good. So there we were, minding our own business. Suddenly there's a big commotion upstairs, and 3 pot-bellied policemen come rushing down, and the party's over. Yeah, so we all get arrested. There, back then, LSD was like communism in Long Island. Yeah, it was a big threat to the way things were. So I told them it was speed, and we get arrested. They get released. You know, they just go to the thing, but I stay overnight. They released me to my mother. 2 days later, I get rearrested because the lab report came back. It was LSD. So I get rearrested, and now I'm really in a lot of trouble, big time trouble. When I go down to the downstairs to see the room, the Don Juan is ripped off, Jimi Hendrix, and I had a little shelf where the jewelry box was. I opened it, they didn't look into the jewelry box. There was 500 hits of acid, all this little shit. I could not fucking believe it. How did they not look into this thing? So I'm very paranoid. So I take the acid, and I put it in a sock, and I dig a little hole in the backyard, and I put it there. Now, where I lived in Rockville Center, they had this weird adult guy, Mike Clobinger. So if you were a kid, got in trouble, he became like some mediary between you and the authorities. So he took me to get my hair cut, found a suit for me. I don't know this guy from Adam, but he's like my new uncle or something. So get my hair cut, get a suit, and then he hears from other people that there's 500 hits of acid. So he has me in my yard with a flashlight over my shoulder looking for that shit. I could never find the top. And then when I looked at the kids playing in the neighborhood, I was wondering, did they fucking find this shit? You would think that would have been enough to stop me, but it wasn't enough to stop me. What I decided is, because the next week I got arrested again. We were smoking in a bug going around, and the on CPU, it was called Crime Prevention Unit. They didn't wear uniforms. They followed us. We threw all the shit out. We pulled our car. They pulled ours. We took off and hit their door when they were opening. And they shot at us. We got 4 bullets in a bug, a Volkswagen bug. 3 of them went through both windows. And yet when I went down to the ground, I looked at my friend, I said, I'm gonna run, because this is the second arrest in 1 week. I'm fucked. So when they brought me I swear, when they brought me in and the guy was writing his, whatever report, his holster was right there, and I was thinking of grabbing it. I did, and my friend was sitting over there. 2 of my other friends were getting interrogated, and he was looking at me going, and I'm going, fuck, and he's going, no, and I'm going, fuck, because I felt I was fucked. I was going to go to prison. So and it was just hanging there like a lollipop. I had 2 good legs. I thought I could pull it off at the time. So I didn't do it. What happens is I get 3 more arrests. And the 3rd arrest is, I don't know if you know Long Island, but Mineola, that's where the courts are. And underneath the courts is a jail. There's a little jail there. That's where you're held, and at least back then. And this time, I was 17 at this point, 16 or 17. When they brought you into court, you were handcuffed to someone else. You had, yeah. And in this case, I was handcuffed to an older guy who was a flasher. He had a London fog raincoat, and he had no clothes on, and greasy hair, really. And they bring me into court, and I'm looking around, and my mother is in the audience, yeah? So I look at my mother. She has the sorrow of 1,000 mothers, on her face. And so my answer was just not to look at her. And I told my family, don't tell her anymore. So the next 2 arrests, she never found out. But there I was. What they did is they put me into a pre-probation program because I was under 18. So 17, and I hadn't been convicted yet. So 17 to 20 for 3 years, I was on this probation thing. I had a probation officer, George Thorson, which I ended up selling drugs to. Yeah. It was just insane. A lot of urine tests, a lot of shit. But I started just getting high inside. I wouldn't make a move outside. Just that tractor beam was too much. But inside, I had lead walls protecting me. So at 20, I have the final court date. They tell me that my brother-in-law was rich. He was like a nuclear engineer. He got a very good lawyer. He got me on a B misdemeanor, released on my own recognizance. So I'm 20 now. I have this. None of this has affected using and drinking. None of it. No, not at all. 20, I get out. My family has a meeting, and there's a majority vote that Paul should take his show on the road. Can't live with mom anymore. And so, to me, I went to Mecca, which was Miami, from what I used to do, the cocaine. So I went to Mecca in 1977, Florida. 77, 80. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist. After a few years of active alcoholism and addiction, my idea of success was not to be arrested. That's all I wanted, just don't get arrested. So 77 to 80 was a highlight. I did not get arrested down there. But I was transformed completely by what I was doing. If you did what I did, you knew I did it. Yeah, so if you were at a club and I was at a club, I knew what you did and you would know what I did. No talking, nothing, just yeah. So it got worse and worse, as always. So 1980, I was really scared down there. I had met this woman who was born the same day I was. It was a very strange, weird thing. When I was doing well under probation, I had a lady in Brooklyn who was an astrologist. She did my horoscope. Her name was Shelley Entine. And she thought I was a pretty nice guy. I wasn't doing that much shit. She ran into me when I was working in Coconut Grove, Florida. I worked in a sex shop called the Pink Pussycat Boutique, where we sold, yeah, it was incredible, really. They have one in West Village. And if you worked at one, you could work at all of them. There's 3 of them. And we used to sell the dolls, you know, with the orifices. And, it was fucking, my Catholic upbringing just was I could hear my grandmother in my head all day. But I was working there, and I was at a juice bar right around the corner. I ran into Shelley Entine. Now she's thinking of me like the old way when I was good, but I am not good right now. And she tells me, I have a customer who's you may help, like, 'cause she's really fucked, and she's born the same day you are, so not older, but same day, January 21st. Right. So I said, well, send her not to the fucking Pink Pussycat Boutique, but I'll meet her around the juice bar, like whatever. And so she shows up, this lady Barbara, and the lady shows up, and she brings me back to her condominium, and she introduces me to Freebase. Yeah, she's making Freebase. And her job is she's an escort for government people in Washington. So these guys would come in the weekend, I wouldn't see her, and when they leave, she'd have thousands of dollars. And then she would just buy Coke and Freebase. She never went out, and I was outmatched, man. I was 25, she was 35. I started hallucinating. It's getting really weird, so I flew home. I left. Overnight, I went back to Long Island. I went and I lived with my sister. She had bought my mom's house. I knew something was bad, and I decided to go back to this spiritual group I had been introduced to when I was under probation. Went to one of their meetings. It was January 30th, Sunday night, super freezing in Long Island, and I went, it was in Merrick. Went to the meeting, it didn't work. I didn't connect. So I stopped at a bar in Baldwin on Merrick Road called Phineas Teeves. Went in there. My friend was the bartender, and there was only one waitress. No one was in there. He gave me a couple shots of Grand Marnier and gave me a Quaalude. So I left the place, and the night should have been over. But I got to my sister's house, and my head started to advertise that there was a big party had erupted at that bar, and I was missing out on something. So I got in my car and drove back there. The last thing I remember is the light in the car, and that was that. I don't know how much time went by, but when I woke up, I was horizontal. I had a big thing in my nose, and my mouth was super dry. So I was looking around to see what was going on, and in the doorway was my sister-in-law. And by the look on her face, I knew something had happened. And I had been run over twice by a car, crossing the street. And I found out later there was still only 2 people at the bar, the bartender and the waitress. No party had erupted. And my date for the night was a Chevy Monte Carlo. That's what I meant. And so the guy ran me over, didn't know what he hit, so he backed up. So I got backed up on him. So I woke up, and now I'm in a hospital movie. And I'm in a hospital bed for 10 months, 10 fucking months. 37 days with both legs up in the air. I was fucked physically, just incredibly destroyed. I still have this. This is a piece of my back they had to take off to save my leg. So I used to go to bars and win a lot of money. I go, hey, for $5, I bet you I can see my back by looking at my leg. And they go, no fucking way. I go, yeah, there you go. Yeah, so I got run over, and it was, you can't explain. You know, this is a subjective experience, yeah? So we're all in our private hells. There is no place called hell. It's made up in the head, yeah? So you can look at all the statistics, but it doesn't do it justice, yeah? And you're trying to remember how bad it was, you can't do it justice, because it's a subjective experience. When you were there, it was hell, yeah? So there I was, 10 months, you would think this would have done something, but it didn't. The thing went into hibernation, and it was fucking filled with drugs anyway, And after 10 months, they released me, and couldn't stay in New York because it was winter, and I was on crutches, and I had fallen already on the ice, yeah? So a good friend of mine from Brooklyn, Ira Goldberg, had opened a business in Santa Cruz, California. And my old girlfriend, Denise, had told him what had happened to me, and he called me up and gave me a job. So I flew out to Santa Cruz, beginning of 1981, and I get a good job, and I'm there, but I have a chance to be a whole new Paul, and the same old Paul gets recreated. I'm now dealing coke on crutches and fucking going to clubs and doing it. It's just insane. Yeah. 81 was, Santa Cruz was too small. I was in San Francisco the end of 81. And from there, I would say 81 to 85 was living on a bottom. It was just unbelievable. I had been introduced to intravenous drugs when I was 17. That came back, and I didn't know how low you could go. It was just unbelievable. And what happened, 85, I overdosed, woke up in the hospital, the cops were there. For some reason they were called out around 7 in the morning. They released me, the nurse, at 8:30. I went to where I was living. On the way, I stopped somewhere, and the guy gave me enough money for a 6-pack of Talls. I walked to where I was living. The landlady lived with me. She wasn't there. She was at work. She'd be home at 6. I had spent the rent money. I didn't have the money on the shit that I overdosed on. Do you think I planned my escape? No. I just kicked back, drank all her liquor, used her phone, ate her food, and then around 5:30, I get worried. What am I going to do? I had a whole day to plan my escape. 5:30, I had been introduced to a program. They have it in New York, Delancey Street. They have one of the franchises in San Francisco. A girlfriend had dropped me off there. She became an ex-girlfriend quickly. I walked in and I found out what it was, and I ran out, and she had split. But I remember this place, and it was right down the street from where I was, and I walked down there, 1985. And when you came in, there's a bench, and if you sat on the bench, it signified you've lost the game of life. Yeah. Like with me, if I'm managing my life, it always leads me to having to be managed by others. It's just the way it goes. So there I was. I had nowhere to go, nothing to do. So I was sitting there, look at the clock, 6 o'clock. I say to myself, I'm going to give them to 6:30. Like I have a lot of important things to do. Didn't have a pot to piss in, nowhere to go. They brought me in a room, interviewed me. I didn't care what they were saying, but one thing they said I was keen on, and that was, do you want a place to stay? And that was what I wanted. And I said yes. They said you have to make a 2-year commitment. So I swallowed that one. I said yes, and I was a full-fledged member of Delancey Street, 300 clients, and there I was, 85. Now, Delancey Street was big enough thing between me and me. I stayed there 2 years, and I thrive in an institutional setting. I really do. I went to college. I did a lot of stuff. But what happened was, after about a year, I started thinking about what my problem was, and it was narcotics, obviously. But I made a little amendment that I could probably drink, which I did not run by anyone in the program. Just filed it away. Continued on. Now, Delancey Street was a trip. They had colored brochures, and they would announce that they had like 97% success rate about keeping people sober. But you had to read the fine print. You could never leave Delancey Street. You would have to live there to stay sober. So they were coming up to the 2-year mark, and they wanted to know what I wanted to do, and they made a deal. We want you to sign up for 5 more years. I said, I don't know, is there any other idea, any other solution? And they go, yeah, there's a workout program. And I said, what does it entail? It says, you get a job outside, you get a checking account. When you buy a car, if you find a place to live, you can move out, you graduate. So that's what I did. And I talked about it, this is the 4th time I shared this story. I talked about it the other day. I read the paper and I looked at some jobs, and the first job I went to, I got. And I was thinking it was God and God and God, but there was a different story. The guy, it was a specialty hardware store that this very rich family owned, and they had their uninterested son running it. Yeah, he could care less, and he had a manager. Now the manager was interviewing me. The manager, 2 years later, got assassinated on San Bruno Mountain. He was a huge cocaine dealer. He got his shot in the balls, the knees, the balls, and the head. And he saw what I was. He saw exactly what, he was hiring me to do other shit. You know what I mean? But I said, oh, I got first job interview, I get the job. Because he knew exactly what he wanted from me. So this job, every Friday they stop at 12. Everyone would start doing coke. Then they go to a bar and play pool and drink. Never touched it until after 4 months when I graduated. But what happened is I found a place to live. 2 young girls were in there. I could afford it. I looked pretty good. I have khaki pants, blue blazer. They liked me like I was Dr. Jekyll, but Mr. Hyde was going to be moving in. And I moved in, and as soon as I got out of Delancey Street, I didn't know what to do with myself after 5:30 when I got off of work. And that irritability and the little suspended parasite woke up. And that little idea that I could drink, it fell upon, and I decided to go back to a bar I used to go to called the Rose and Thistle, California and Polk. We used to call it the Nose and Sniffle. And I went there and I ordered the first beer that I'd had in 2 years. They didn't say no. They weren't following my newsletter. They just forgot me. And they gave me the beer. Nothing happens. I order a second beer. Halfway through the second beer, it wasn't enough. I wanted more. Now, more could be more beer, but for me, it's something else. So I'm looking around the room. The guy who used to sell more is still selling more there. It's like a franchise. I kiss his ass. He sells me some more. I go out to the Toyota Corolla I had, which I'd lose a day later. And I open up and do a line of this stuff, and it's like Jack Nicholson through the door at The Shining. You know, that end, here's Johnny. Completely like this. I was possessed, and I believe we're possessed. I believe something that is not us, something foreign to us, takes us over and uses us for transportation. Because everyone who's been taken over by this shows very similar traits, and it ends up at very similar places. So if there's millions of unique drivers and they end up in the same 3 parking spaces, they're not the driver. Something is overriding their driver, like a kid playing a toy, yeah, and you're ending up where something else wants you to end up. One of the places could be here, yes? So I went on a 10-month run. I had gone to college. I really felt optimistic when I left Delancey Street. I thought it was over. I thought that period of being Mr. Hyde was over, and I was going to be Dr. Jekyll from now on. And I was wrong. I had no defense. The thing took me over quickly. I had 2 years of health, so it took about 10 months to really beat me way down. And what happened was I went out March 17th, 1988, St. Patrick's Day. I had also been out March 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. But it's a signpost because something was going to happen finally. March 17th went out. March 18th was still out. March 18th, 19th, I lost the car. 20th, I don't know what happened. 21st, if you've ever had blackouts, it's sort of like when you come out of it, it's like parachuting behind enemy lines, you know? You're like, no one's missed you because you've been there. You just don't remember you've been there. So you're looking around trying to, what am I talking about shit? So I came to, and I didn't know where I was. I look outside, and there's a hang gliding airport, and I'm sure there's no hang gliding airport in San Francisco. I know that for a fact. So I go, what? And then I feel like it's a very small room, and it's a trailer. So I'm in a trailer next to a hang gliding part, sitting with this guy I've never seen before. and passing a bottle of Royal Gate vodka. This is what they call Smirnoff here. It's a different, the same bottle, same shit, with a different label. Bad there, it's called the Royal Gate. We always say, at the end you enter the Royal Gate. You know, it's like 50 cents pint of vodka. So we were passing this bottle back and forth, and I look at him and I go, this guy's a fucking bum. He had a bulbous nose, varicose veins on his face. And lo and behold, he was looking at me like I was a bum. And something happened that I never imagined could happen. We call, a lot of people in AA know this feeling, but this was an extended pause. Something just hit the pause button, and everything came to a halt, and that screen just went blank, and it was like a CNN news flash with just a headline, no story, and the news flash was, I'm fucked. Yeah, I'm fucked. And my whole life, when using, was to deny that. Every drink, every fucking activity was to keep that reality that I had a strong suspicion was true out of my sight. Yeah? Well, it broke. And then the next thing was, and I'm not managerial quality. Simple as that. What happened? My thought streams went a whole different way. I got up and I went to a phone booth and I called Delancey Street. And I asked them if I could come back. And they said no. They said, come back in a month and we'll see if we want you or not. Yeah? So I called up a woman who I used to party with, this nurse, and I asked her if she would help me. And I must have sounded humbled enough she agreed. So she drove an hour and a half up, and in that hour and a half, this was going to be the, as of now, going to be the last alcoholic Yahoo. I tried to talk her into getting some Coke, getting something to drink, the hotel room, the dirty magazines and shit. But she had followed that equation with me many times, hadn't been that satisfying for her. So she said no. She says, if you want a place to stay, you got to go to an AA meeting. And now this sounds like incredible progress. The last deal was 2 years. I'm making 1 hour. Yeah. So I said yes. And she brought me to my first AA meeting, March 21st, 1988, at Salvation Army in Valencia, San Francisco, a men's meeting. Went in there. I thought she wouldn't pick me back up at 9, but she did. Went in there at 8, and I felt some hope. And it allowed me to really feel how hopeless I was. She picked me up at 9, brought me back to our place, a condominium. Her roommate did not like me, so she had to sneak me in, and I had to sleep in her closet. Yeah, and I'm a little longer than the closet was. That was my first night. But I woke up in the morning, I had some wisdom, and the wisdom was, I better call this AA because I'm not going to make it till 8 o'clock. So I called AA, and they told me there was a new meeting at 17th and Guerrero, yeah? And I went to that new meeting, and I haven't stopped going now for 36 years, yeah? And an amazing thing was, I did not get sober in AA. I've been able to stay sober because of AA. Because the miracle happened before I ever knew of AA. I got whacked sober, but that would have died on the vine if I wasn't introduced to a way of life. Yeah. Maybe other people, they don't need that, but in my case, I needed a whole new way of life to reestablish how I saw things, because how I saw things wasn't fucking working. So I got into, that night I was at a meeting again, and I've been going ever since. And there is a solution. This was one of the greatest chapters of all time, because for many people it doesn't seem like there's a solution, or they think they have a solution, which is getting loaded. That's not a fucking solution. That was the first solution I had to alcoholism, was to drink when I was a kid. It didn't work. Yeah, and so what happened? I just started went to meetings. First, of course, you're sitting in the back, and being in the meetings, for some reason or another, I could feel things about myself that I wasn't feeling when I was running around. And I felt that I was in some kind of cocoon of terminal uniqueness. I felt like I was completely encased because I did not believe you thought like I did. I did not believe you felt like I did. I did not believe you did the heinous things I did. So I was stuck in this thing, and I was listening to people share, and after a couple of months, I came to two conclusions. How did these people get my thoughts? Or they're not my thoughts. And we're being driven by the same radio station. You're listening to the same shit I used to listen to. And you're lived under the same tyranny I've lived under. No fucking difference, yeah? If millions of us get driven to the same 3 parking spaces, yeah, there's only one driver that's affecting us. It doesn't have an infinite amount of traits, and that's the beauty of it. Because one alcoholic can recognize another alcoholic, or one addict can recognize another addict, and that's the formula of how we stay sober and how we get well here. It's a we, W-E, we. And when people call me, over the years you meet a lot of people, but I have not met that many people. Usually you meet alcoholism. The person isn't talking to you, the disease is. And it's so fucking boring to hear the fucking story over and over again, yeah? And I can forecast their life without even knowing them. If I know they're an addict, I can tell what it's gonna be like. And I'm not gonna be that far off. You may die on a drug that I said you would be dying another, but you're gonna fucking die, yeah? It's this idea, I've seen thousands of us, yeah? So there is a solution. And my feeling, what happened with me was they use it, the problem, the name they give it in the book is self, yeah? And there's please, if you have a big book, read on page 64, it says on the 3rd paragraph, being convinced, and you're gonna hear that word being, those 2 words, being convinced, because they're requirements in the beginning of recovery. You have to be convinced that you're fucked. That's the first step, you do, yeah? No one else. The patient has to do the diagnosis, really. If you don't see it, this is the problem. AA is an incredible program, but there are people in it. Yeah? And people fuck everything up. The greatest ideas in the world, in this world, have been fucked up by people. Yeah? So this is what happens. There's people in AA. And a lot of people who most need what's offered here are the least interested in it. This is the real sadness of this disease. Because if what was offered, a reprieve, a day at a time reprieve, and it was about cancer, there would be lines trying to get into this fucking meeting. If going to this meeting would ensure them having 1 day of freedom from cancer. But here, some of us who are the most ill are like this, thinking they got it going on. It's insane. So they say things in AA. We are very, very self-centered and selfish, but we don't think so. Exactly. This is the. Yeah. Who's the first person? You're usually the last person to find out you're a drug addict and alcoholic. Some people meet you in a minute, they know. Yeah? Well, how could that be? If you are super sick and you're the least one to know it, part of the sickness is disguising the sickness from you. What's killing you is not telling you. Yeah. It's telling you a whole other story while it's killing you. And if you look at a parasitical relationship between parasite and host, it's not a win-win, usually. For the parasite to win, you lose. And I would say, if you keep ending up in places like this, though I love this place, you're on the losing end of that deal. Yeah. Because when you're looking for your next vacation, I'm sure you weren't going to pick Milestone, especially in the summer, especially July and August. So I humbly believe what really worked with me was I finally saw in this sentence a feeling that I had been given, which is being convinced self manifested in various ways. So some manifested means it appears or makes happen, yeah? So self manifesting in various ways is what has defeated us. So there's a very clear thing. Self is one thing, us is another. I'm telling you, we're in the us camp, and we have been defeated by self. When people say they hate themselves, self may hate you, but you don't hate you. When people say they're their own worst enemy, there may be a worst enemy in you, but it is not of you. Yeah, and this was the big, to me, groundbreaking event. I saw self as foreign to me. I saw the disease of alcoholism as foreign to me. I have a flu, but I'm not the fucking flu. There's a huge distinction. When something has me, or I am that which has me, is quite different. So I saw self manifested in various ways as what has defeated us, and I saw it from us. I felt different than that which had defeated me. And then it made complete sense why we all act alike, do the same fucking thing, because it's one parasite running a lot of different hosts. Yeah? And here's all these very unique hosts, but they're in the same fucking place. Not based on the host, maybe somewhat, a little bit, but based on the parasite. So manifested in various ways is what has defeated us. Super clear description, and this is the beginning of the inventory process, the fourth step, inventory, which is very, very important in recovery. It sets off the first wave of recovery, really, which is seeing your role in things. Instead of, like, that guy punched me for no reason. And then if you ran back the film, you'd see you were trying to make a move on his girlfriend 20 minutes before, but that's conveniently forgotten. Some guy just came out of the blue and punched me. No, yeah? So look at the tape, yeah? You had a role in a lot of the shit, yeah? So this says, self defeats us by its manifestations. Which is the first manifestation of self that we look at in the inventory? Resentment. Resentment is the number one killer of people like us, all right? Then it's fear. And it's actually not even fear, because fear is a valid emotion, but it's being strummed by mental anxiety. Mental anxiety is causing a reaction called fear, and there's no apparent threat. Yeah. Most of us suffer from huge amount of mental anxiety, because the head tells us what's going on, what's going to go on, what went on. Yeah, and it makes us blind to what actually is going on now. Yeah, all right, so manifested in various ways is what has defeated us. Yeah, very clear. It says, be convinced of this. It's, I think, quite important. Right? We are now going to look at its common manifestations. What are they? Resentment, fear, and harms done to other. Not the harms done to others, but in the pursuit of what you want. So it's a selfish, self-seeking drive. Yeah, and we look at the sexual behavior to see how much we've hurt people, like maybe, husbands when we had an affair with the wife or whatever, or the kids, how we've hurt people in the pursuit of what we want with no consideration. Yeah? In this view, that's all of that behavior has been driven by the parasite. Aha. So we do the fourth column inventory where you look at your own things and why don't you, when you walked in here, you looked at me, you probably did an inventory on me. Yeah? A quick assessment. Yes? Everyone we do, we meet, we have all that, blah, 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 blah. He's from Brooklyn or whatever this shit. Yes? Da, da, da. Yet, when we are introduced to doing an inventory ourselves, months and months of fucking dragging our feet. We take inventories all fucking day in a flash, and yet when it's time to take an inventory and look at here, oh, fuck, I've got to do something. Months and months. I humbly believe why there's that resistance is the parasite does not want you to look at your role in things, because you'll see its role in things. Because what you think you did under the influence, it did. What we are holding all guilt and shame for doing, we were driven to do that by the parasite. I am totally convinced of this in my own life. I do not believe when we talked about it the other day. You know what happens in some extreme situations. Let's say if you like cocaine, let's say, and you were on a certain run. And at a certain point, let's say you were shooting cocaine, there was different people there, and suddenly you realized you didn't have any more cocaine left, and then suddenly you start looking around the rug, and you're imagining like an oasis, a mirage, that looks like it could be coke. And then, you know, you would never think of getting on all fours, but you're on all fours in a second or two. And now, and people see it and they get on all fours. And then you're wishing you know, put up like a rancher's fence to keep, this is my little Ponderosa. And you're looking, and you're really picking up lint with the hopes of it being coke. You did that? Did you choose to do that? Or were you driven to do it? You're not going to tell me you could not have imagined ever doing that. If you sat and you had hours to imagine, no fucking way am I going to mistake lint for coke. Yeah? I've seen a lot of people smoke a lot of shit that wasn't coke. So I do not believe, literally, that you drove yourself to that act. I believe you were driven. And I believe what drove you is foreign to you, and I believe it resides in your head. It communicates to you through the thoughts. And when it presents its thoughts, it says it's your thoughts. Yeah? And now you get bound to its thoughts because they're seen as your thoughts. And you get bound by its behavior to be your behavior. And you get left holding the fucking bag. Yeah? And if you don't believe it, just do a simple societal view. How could millions of different people usually end up in the same 3 parking spaces that they say in Narcotics Anonymous? Institution, jails, or death. Do you believe they all miraculously ended up at the same place? Or were they all driven by the same fucking thing? I would say the latter. We have all been driven by the same thing. Yeah? And it's brought us to places. This is a cry for help, these places, these rehabs. This is a cry for help, and if you state before the cry for help you're outmatched, it may fucking work. Because you are outmatched. It has you convinced you're it. It does. Why don't you do an inventory? Why? Why does people leave mostly at step 4 and 9? Because it does not want you to see its behavior. And it's hidden by, it's called your behavior. But you and I have been driven by the same thing, and it drove us to the same fucking places. The only difference between you and I is the parasite is dormant in me, not through luck, but through a way of life. And maybe the parasite for you is kicking and screaming like a pregnancy in your belly. Yeah. That's the only difference. I live in the solution. So to me, this is a living thing. There is a solution. And this solution isn't based on how I fucking feel. It doesn't matter how I feel. If I tell the truth and I do what people do, and I go where those people go, I'm going to get what they got, which is a spiritual awakening that will be sufficient enough to weaken or remove that urge for you to do fucking something stupid. Yeah, and you can live free. I mean free. Can you believe if you've had this monkey on your back, and if someone said that you could have a solution, and that solution would be the problem does not exist for you anymore, that's a fucking high level solution. The problem does not exist for you anymore. It's promised right on page 84. With no thought or an effort on your part, you'll be placed in a position of neutrality. With no thought or effort on your part, the problem will not exist for you because it's not existing as you anymore. The only reason why the problem keeps existing for you because it's existing as you. So let's tell the truth that it's not us. Yeah, and then look at how self defeated us, but not from self's view, but from us view. Let's look and investigate self instead of it fucking investigating us. Yeah, so there is a solution. And meet someone who will lead you, and just do the inventory. Just do the freaking steps. This is supposed to be a launching pad. Not a place where you end up at the end of the road, but a launching pad for new fucking roads. Yeah? I feel. So, and so many people are here to serve because they were under the same circumstances, the same tyranny that you were in. Though every part of this tyranny is that we all think we're so fucking unique. Yeah? But we're run-of-the-mill addicts and alcoholics. Yeah? And there is a solution. So what time is it now?
9 o'clock.
It's at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's past my bedtime. I'm an old dude now. Can you imagine me on the street? 70 years old, fucking, hey, bro, what's going on? Get away from me, fucking Gramps. Whatever. What are you, I mean, you gotta pack the fucking show. Sooner or later. My nephew is 60. It was one of the most revealing moments. He's in and out since he was a kid. He called me up, and usually it's because he needs something. I don't hear from him for a while. He calls me up, and he was in the same rehab that he was in 25 years before. How small of a life is that? He was in the same rehab he was in just a couple months ago, 25 years before. So, yeah, there is a solution. There's a lot of help. You know, grace abides. There's a lot of grace. Something will do. This, can I use this 1 minute, 5 minutes? Mm-hmm. This is very important to me. It may be more about the community, but I found it was quite easy for me to recognize that something was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. First of all, like it says in the book, no human power could get you sober. That was completely demonstrated in my life because my mother's love did not get me sober. The police and all of the punishments did not get me sober. Getting run over by a car did not get me sober. Something, I don't know what it is, but it's not a human, got me sober. Yeah? So I have, my whole basis of living is this view that something does and can and will do for me what I can't do for myself. So I admit the powerlessness and I feel a lot of power. I admit I'm overwhelmed day in and day out, and yet I seem to be able to travel lighter through it. Yes? So here it is, and I believe many of us are singing the praises of something that has brought about a lot of goodness through us. What about the old employer, or the old power that was doing through us what we never would have done by ourselves? We're taking all the blame of that management team and giving all the praise to the new management team. I think we need to talk about pointing the finger at what needs to be pointed at. We're holding guilt and shame that it produced 40 fucking years ago, some of us. If you have the ability to have gratitude for something doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself, you have the wisdom to see that something did through you that shit you would never have done by yourself. This is what I hope becomes a platform in AA, because we're still haunted by a fucking long shadow of the past based on being the doer of all that shit we were driven to do. Yeah? You are not the driver if the description is driven. Yes? If the description is you and I have been driven, it means it excludes the possibility we were the driver. It may have looked like we were the driver, but we were driven by something. Let's give it credit or blame where it's due. And stop walking around with a bag of guilt and shame. I did tons of shit. Yeah? And I remember the first amend I got caught in, because it hit me by surprise. Me and my friend, we rode bikes, and he had more time than me. And he had a girlfriend, and I had a woman I wanted to be a girlfriend. And we were riding the bike, motorcycles. We came to his apartment, and as we were walking up to his apartment, this lady walked by down the stairs, and she had all paint on her pants and stuff, and didn't notice anything. We go into his place. He forgets something in the motorcycle, goes down, comes back and says, "Hey, my neighbor wants to talk to you." I thought I was a house painter. I thought I'm going to give her some hints how to do her kitchen or something. She comes into the little sitting room and she goes, "Hi, Paul, do you remember me?" I go, no. She says, you owe me $500. So she was some lady that moved in an apartment I had, and I asked for a down payment that's supposed to go to it went to me. So there I was, trying to be impressive, and I caught with my pants down. I did not feel any guilt and shame because I had gotten the idea that I was suffering from a disease. And I looked at her and I said, what I did to you, I would have done to anyone unless you could physically stop me. And I paid her over a few weeks, and every time I sent her a check, it's because I'm in recovery. Yeah. And that relief that the idea of the disease gave me just manifested usually when I saw self as foreign to me. Yeah. Are you going to blame yourself let's say the flu causes you to throw up. Are you going to blame yourself for fucking throwing up? If you throw up based on the flu, are you going to blame yourself for fucking throwing up? That's what we're doing now. Something has thrown up in our life, and we're taking the blame for it. And yet we're completely open and have the ability to give all gratitude to the higher power saving us. What about the shit that fucking drowned us? Give it some credit or what it's due, I feel. Because the past is something right now to be free from. You don't want an arm of the parasite reaching 40 years into your life and having you pinned down by something you didn't actually do and reminiscing around it over and over and over fucking again. So I can go on and on, but I'll leave it there. But there's a huge difference between resentment and my resentment. Resentment doesn't have a long life when it's wild. When you domesticate it and call it yours, it can last 70 years. Fear, it's not even fear, it's mental anxiety. And if you look at the book, read the book. We make decisions based on self that set off trains of circumstances that bring us misfortune. Yeah, we experience some misfortune. It's not ours. It was based on a decision on self, and self is not us. It's right there in the big book, page 64. Self defeated us. Yeah, it's not like self. Page 64. Now go to 98, and then us. No, self defeated us. It's very concise, very clear. There's no gray area. There's a foreignness to what has defeated us. Have you ever said you're the flu? No. But you say you're the self, and self is the illness. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Guys, Paul will be speaking again tomorrow at 7 and again on Sunday at 6. And so you're all invited for that. Also, there's some shirts and a book or two.
We have a lot of books. I want to do something. Yeah. If you're interested in a book called Under Arrest, or in somewhere in I don't know if they're there, but you have it. I sent the box there. Give them for free to anyone. Yeah. If you want a book, it's on the 12 steps we did called Under Arrest. Just take it for free, and then pass it on if you like. And then tomorrow night I'm going to tell Steve's story, and then Sunday Phyllis's story. Because mine isn't going to change. I'm going to use Steve and Phyllis, all right?
All right.
I'll dress for the occasion.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you for your message.
Oh, you're welcome, my friend.